And unfortunately, most modern food sources actually deplete us. They don't nourish us. And again, that's the difference between nutritional analysis to me, because the panel on the side of the modern food might look like it has what you need. And if you sat down and just combined a bunch of them together and said, okay, now I'm getting everything I need in the category of iron. Now I'm getting everything that I need in the category of calcium. If I just eat these foods, it'll be great. But it's not nourishing you.
Well, thank you so much for coming, Chrys. Really appreciate you being here and taking the time out of your day. I've gotten to know you over the last couple of years. I've gone to some of your workshops on food and nutrition, and really, I've come to appreciate how expansive the knowledge that you have is in different areas of nutrition. And so I was just really excited to bring you on today.
You're welcome, and thank you. I appreciate that you have the capacity to recognize something valuable. Cool.
So can you talk to me a little bit about what got you into nutrition? Were there nutritional problems with yourself or your family that kind of cued you in that was something important?
Actually, I don't think of myself as focusing on nutrition. What you heard me say a lot in one of the classes that you took was I talk a lot about the energetics of food. And how I got started was I was a really healthy child. I often tell the story I never missed a day of school because of illness from grade 1 to grade 12. In my high school years and my later high school years, I did skip school a few times to do other things that I thought were important, but I never got sick, and I was very athletic. So I didn't come into questioning things about food from a place of need or problems or anything like that. I was very curious because I was exposed to something back in so it was the mid to late 60s. I was exposed to macrobiotic theory because I lived in the greater Boston area, and there was a lot of activity around that. And it was as much a philosophy as it was a food practice. And I liked what I was learning, and I liked the food, and it was all totally unfamiliar to me. We were playing with and eating and cooking foods that I'd never heard of before. Grains, brown rice, sea vegetables. I lived on the coast, so I knew about seaweeds, but I didn't know about them as a food source. I had heard that it was something maybe someday in the future we'd be mining sea vegetables for nutrition. So things that I'd never heard of before that had the potential from a perhaps more spiritual perspective to bring our daily food practices into alignment with the best and highest good for the planet as well as the people on it. And that's what attracted me. Not so much because of any problems, health problems.
I feel that in your like what you've taught in your classes, there's something, and in eating your food, which I have some in my fridge right now from from the most recent
Monday lunch, as people call it.
Yep. I have that sense of like there's way more here than most people who are talking about nutrition. For instance, like you said, there's food types that you're dealing with, like the unleavened bread, like the ferments. You can hear about those things in some places, but you have a number of elements that you've combined. Can you talk about what some of the staples are?
Sure. I personally feel that grains and vegetables are a vitally core part of our personal dietary practices for those very reasons I just stated, that ultimately on this planet, the way it's been designed as we understand it, if more people were using grains and vegetables and beans and their subsidiaries, so to speak, within those categories, the planet would do better overall. The food practices of the animal food industry are not great, as most people are aware of at this point. And dependence on those foods from animals puts a strain on the planet as a whole. Now, some of those things are being mitigated by regenerative agriculture now, which is a somewhat hot topic out there for people that are involved in growing and utilizing land well, land stewardship. And, I could be shown that I'm not accurate anymore, that there are practices that could be utilized to make animal foods better for the planet, but the way it's been for the last 100 years or so has not helped our planet at all, nor has it helped us as humans in terms of our well-being. Most of the animal foods have been highly contaminated, either naturally or during the processing processes, or because the animals are being forced to go through their life cycle faster than is natural, so they're given hormones and they're given things to make them grow faster. All of those, I'm making broad sweeping statements here, but all of those have made the animal food industry not a great source for really good nutrition, and even beyond nutrition, good energetics. That's the other word that I use a lot when I talk about food, the energetics of food. So to get back to your original question, for me, grains and vegetables that have been grown by people who have an intimate relationship with their land and with what they're growing on their land, so that means small family farms, really, not massive, big agribusiness type food sources, that keeping the real relationship between us as humans and us as humans utilizing our land and utilizing what comes from our land intact, rather than turning it into a massive business proposition, is at the core of why I talk about food, why I do food the way I do, why I expend enormous amounts of energy, comparatively speaking, not just going off to the grocery store, but developing relationships with farmers and, being willing to go and pick up food fresh from the farm and things like that, which it's a step back in time for most people to do that. They don't want to take the time away from what else they're doing, and I understand that. I can appreciate that. Yet the benefits and the rewards of getting to know at least some of the people that supply you with the food that you eat on a regular basis are huge. And most people who do take the time to develop that sort of thing feel those rewards. So I hope that answers your question in a way that is useful.
Well, I feel like that's something really unique and valuable that we have in this area. Like I got a whole lamb slaughtered last season, and I know the person who raised the lamb. I know what his practices are. He doesn't have an organic certification label on his product, but I know because he told me face to face, and I trust him. He's all his pastures are free of herbicides and pesticides. There's no antibiotics or hormones, artificial hormones introduced to his livestock. So when I lived before in the city, I was finding myself saying, I can't possibly understand the supply chains that are coming here. I can't possibly understand where my food is coming from. And that was one of the reasons that caused me to move out here. I wanted to know where my food was coming from.
Great.
Wanted to be able to trust that.
Yeah. And I want to emphasize that I've lived in Boston. Well, it's a pretty big city. And even living in Boston, I took the time to develop relationships, because when I did live in Boston, organic was on the horizon. It hadn't developed into a fully blown industry of its own. And so in order to get things that were organically grown, you had to develop relationships with farmers. And over the time that I lived in Boston, that changed, and stores were beginning to get organic foods into them. But I found that even living in Boston, even raising a really large family, I still could find the time, because it was important to me, to go out and learn where my food was being grown and the people that were growing it. And I liked that. I didn't have the highly developed reasoning that I have now. I just liked having a relationship with someone that was growing my food, much as it sounds like you liked having a relationship with where you got your lamb.
Yeah, I had a strange experience of, this was maybe a year ago. I was traveling and now living in a small place traveling seems like when I'm going to a bigger city, it's like, oh, I should take advantage of this opportunity and see what's on my list. I haven't been here for a while, so I'll like hit the stores. And going into a Sprouts, and I mean, I like Sprouts. When I lived in the city, I was like, that was my go-to spot. But I'm having this experience now of like I go there, and there's actually nothing on the shelves that really I want to buy, because I know I can get things locally, and I know who produced them, right? So it's that relationship that you were talking about, adds a depth to it that, I mean, it just draws me in. I want to stay.
Yeah, and I decided at a relatively young age that mattered to me. Developing relationships around food, whether it was learning to know a grower or being with people who are learning to use foods that they'd never seen before or heard of before, but developing a relationship around that was deeply satisfying, and still is to this day. I find that the part of me gets nourished. So nourishment as opposed to nutrition is probably more close to what matters to me. How can we be well nourished? I had an old macrobiotic friend that used to have Be Nourished was her trademark. And she wrote some books and had a school in Grand Junction for teaching people how to feel that they were learning how to be nourished by their foods. And I thought, yeah, I relate.
So there's, I'm imagining there's sort of a positive and a negative dynamic to that of you don't want toxins in your body. You don't want, for instance, a substance that might be chelating to minerals. What might that be?
Yep.
Glyphosate, right? And then on the other hand, you want the nutrition and the energy that's going to boost you. Do you want to talk a little bit more about like both sides of that?
Well,
and is there anything else I'm missing that like ties into the equation of what nourishment means?
Well, using your example of having met the farmer or the rancher, whatever he called himself, who grew the lamb, probably had a personal relationship with the lamb that you had. And that personal relationship piece is so lost when we buy off grocery store shelves. We don't have any personal relationship with anything when we're doing that. And again, I am not trying to make a statement against grocery stores.
Right.
It's more, what do we want to tune into and what's important to us if we have some sense that there's more we could be doing as people, as individuals, to support ourselves and our planet and our small communities or our large communities. Most large communities have small communities within them. And how can we really support those, whether they're families or, because of a cultural thing, something like that. So the positive and negative that you just spoke of, yes, there's a lot of things that I don't want in what I'm going to put into my body, especially as food sources. And so educating myself was a piece of my journey about that. I didn't really want to have food that was grown underneath giant power lines, because even though I don't take the time to really understand the deep science around whether EMFs are a problem or not, I'm willing to say that there's probably something there that is an influence on what's grown or what lives close to such things. And I'd rather not have that in my food. Same thing with GMOs. When GMOs first came on the scene, publicly anyway, I think they were on the scene a long time before they were publicly understood. I did enough research to understand that I was raising children and I didn't want things going into their bodies that their bodies were not going to be able to recognize as part of their food. And then what kind of strange things could happen to our body's systems that were well designed to eat naturally available foods if we started putting in something that had been spliced into a genome or into a gene? What are we doing to our system that has the capacity to work really well if we work with it and work in alignment with how it was designed? So that's a big piece for me, to both understand the negatives and inform myself about them, and then to learn how can I best enhance how my body's able to utilize what I eat. And that I can do from both a mental perspective, but also paying attention to how my body's doing, paying a lot more attention than most of us do, to how my energy is, how my sleep is. I tend to really push myself. I demand a great deal of my body. And I learned early on that the best way to get some of that great deal to be able to be available to me is to take good care of it. And I don't always take the best of care. I'm not somebody that's like doing some pristine dietary or lifestyle practices. It matters to me to learn, to understand, and then to put into practice things that will actually take care of myself well. So once again, I don't promote myself as someone that has all the answers for all things. But I think that at a fundamental level, we can talk to one another and learn from one another without becoming scientists, because our bodies and our beings actually have a lot of awareness. And if we start talking at that level, instead of how much can I scientifically analyze something, I remember in one of our first classes, you confronted me with a whole list of information that you had studied and you knew about. And I said, well, that isn't the way I go about it. I don't go about it and completely analyze something down to the last detail of what's in it and then determine that it's a good food source for me. I look at it from a much broader spectrum. Where was it grown? How was it grown? Who grew it? Is it natural? Is it something that developed on its own, or was it spliced together in a laboratory somewhere to become what it is? All of those things matter to me. And then when people come around me and they say, oh, wow, I feel really different when I eat your meals. I like how I feel.
Right.
That registers to me as, okay, so there's something to what I'm doing that's worth talking about and continuing to do. And I'd like to keep it at that level. So if someone wants to come to me and learn the scientific analysis of the foods or the nutrients in the food that I'm serving them, they won't get it from me. They can get it if they want to bring it to a lab. But I'm much more interested in what I'll keep in the category of the energetics of the whole thing.
There's definitely elements. There's there's recipes. There's different food groups that you're working with.
Yes.
Fermentation was one of the big pillars that I learned a lot from you on.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the role that fermentation plays?
Sure. So I'm imagining, and I've read enough to know that to some degree this is true, one of the things that people long ago learned very quickly was that food spoils. Products that they cook or products that they harvest or gather can spoil under the right circumstances. But from some of those experiences that they had, they also learned that food can go through a particular decomposition process that's actually beneficial to us. It adds in bacteria that, and they didn't, of course, know about bacteria, but they knew that something positive happened. They also knew that when they found this pile of vegetables that rotted in a different way and actually smelled curiously interesting, that when they ate it and ate it on a regular basis, it changed things for them. They felt better. They could absorb, again, they wouldn't have used this language, but they were absorbing their food better. So basically they were, in our language today, we would say that they were populating their gut with the necessary bacteria to best utilize the nutrients in the foods that they were eating. There's a lot of stories. I have a lot of stories, but one of them, sailors were suffering a lot in the 1800s and 1700s from scurvy when they go out to sea. And that's a vitamin C deficiency in a big way. And if you're a long time on a ship and you don't have any sources of natural vitamin C through your food, one time there was a ship that had sauerkraut on the ship, and those sailors never got scurvy, and they were anticipating that they would probably get scurvy. Vitamin C, most of the science doesn't seem to pay attention to this, but vitamin C is in a lot of fermented foods in a form that we can readily absorb. And after a while, ships would not leave certain countries anyway, unless they had some fermented foods. because those fermented foods carried them through the periods of time when they couldn't have fresh sources. And there's so much information out there now about why the gut biome is so important and the brain-gut connection and all of those things, that when I'm teaching about fermentation, what most people notice is when they start to have some ferments on a regular basis, it doesn't have to be a lot, and we talked about that in class, just a small amount with as many meals as you're willing to have it at, but regular and ongoing, they felt so much better. One woman said her brain fog cleared up completely. And she'd been suffering from brain fog for a long time. But as soon as there's a caveat here. There are some ferments that are made from sugars, pure sugars, like, do I want to get into this? The fermented sugars, which is really different from a whole vegetable that's been fermented with salt so that you get lactic acid fermentation. And those fermented sugar forms have been touted as being really beneficial to our gut. They are very beneficial to your gut if you're going to live on sugar. They're not beneficial to your gut if you're going to eat foods, and not just fruits especially. And they actually are counterproductive for the establishment of a healthy gut biome. This goes against advertising. But advertising is oftentimes skewed to be able to sell a product whether or not it's accurate or not. And
so not all probiotics are created equal.
Right.
And the bacterial culture that you're going to get in there is going to be optimized for eating whatever it was raised on.
Yes.
Yeah, grown on.
Yeah, and every culture pretty much that's traditional and not been too, nowadays it's pretty hard to have it not be influenced by modern foods, but every culture always had something in their history that was fermented, and they had ferments that were fermented from sugars for the most part, but those were very specially and sparsely used. They were used for special occasions. You more or less get high from them, is what happens. And so alcoholic ferments and things like that, which is great. But if that's what you're eating on a regular basis, thinking that you're supporting your gut biome, it's very misleading. So to go back to vegetables that have been fermented, and if you are someone who likes to eat dairy food, the fermented dairy food, of course, is going to be more usable for your gut than the straight dairy food in terms of keeping you healthy. So cheeses, but again, the modern practices in the food industry have changed the fermenting processes oftentimes so that they will happen in a day, what used to happen in weeks or months. So no true fermentation occurs. They use enzymes and other fast-moving things to do ferments. Once again, if you go back to the traditional methods of doing ferments, you can find in a good health food store or in your local farmer's market, you can find people who are now fermenting traditional methods and using traditional methods to ferment. That's going to build your gut biome really well. And it also supports your local growers and farmers. When you look if you're in a big city, a lot of times some of the grocery stores will reach out to the local farmers or the local people who are doing those things and bring their products in. But there's also a big movement to not allow that to happen because they're not being as regulated. There's a lot to take into consideration, but it brings you back to develop a personal relationship or make it yourself. Learn to make ferments. They're very easy to do, and then introduce them to your family. I've had multiple experiences on farms where I was doing classes where children would come with their families. Especially we did some families on the farms with other cultural groups that would come onto the farms. Hispanic, which is easy here because we have large Hispanic communities, but also Asian cultures that have come here. And the children of the women, for the most part, that would come to the farm, when they got to try some of the pickled vegetables, they would gobble them up. They couldn't stop. They just wanted more and more. And that was a healthy sign because they're not intellectually, not because they understood the science, but because they knew that something really beneficial was happening to them. And the parents said, "We're so glad we learned how to ferment. My grandma used to do that, but my mother and I didn't know how to do it, so it didn't carry on in the family tradition. And my children are doing much better for having these things." So it's anecdotal and different from a scientific experience, but I've had enough of those experiences to see that things happen for people when they're exposed to foods that actually make a difference for them, whether it's because innately those foods have a lot to offer, like a ferment, or because someone very purposefully prepared the food with a lot of intention. And I remember one of my teachers once saying, you know, if you're going to go out and eat at a restaurant, try to go to a restaurant where the cook comes out and talks to the people, and the cook likes to learn to know the people that he or she is serving, because there's a connection there, and it comes through in the food. And I was like 19 at the time, and I hadn't even ever considered anything like that, but I started to pay attention to that. And when I would go to small family restaurants where the cook came out and you got to meet the cook or the cooks, it was different. The atmosphere in the restaurant was different. You know, we all felt nurtured in a way that didn't happen when it was just a restaurant. You know, so these are the interesting pieces that I like to collaborate together and bring into an awareness about food.
Yeah,
I'm going all over the place, but you can travel with that.
Well, it's so connected to vitality, right? Whether it's the human connection to others, because food is what's bringing us together, whether it's the connection to the microbiome, because you've been fermenting something and growing a culture there. I remember growing up, I didn't like pickles at all.
Yeah.
And what was being offered to me was something that had been soaked in vinegar.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really until your class that I had this aha moment, and I bit into a pickle which had been salt fermented, and it was living, and I could feel that entering my body. This is living food, and I could feel my body like perk up and the vitality from that. And so I was like, well, this is totally different. On the one hand, you have something that's been sterilized, and on the other, you have a living environment that's been cultivated. And they couldn't be more different from each other.
And you responded differently, noteworthily. You could tell that difference. I also grew up not particularly liking pickles, but there was a corner store that had this giant oak barrel, and I really liked their pickles. And I found out years and years and years later, those pickles were made with a salt brine lactic fermentation, and then they added some vinegar later. But they were lactic acid fermented, and that's what I was responding to. That same sense of vitality. Wow, I like this. Even my mouth felt good.
So one of the patterns that I see in like modern food production is that it's emulating what our body was designed to respond to. It's emulating that, but it's not fully reproducing it.
Yeah. I can give you a good example of that. Most people say, oh, soy sauce. You're using soy sauce, right? No, I'm not using soy sauce. Soy sauce has become something that's made in like an hour. And it used to take months to make what's called soy sauce now. And none of us know anything about that. But we respond to soy sauce because there's also something called, I'm going to come back to this. My mind can go all over the place with information. But when products are properly done in a traditional fashion that includes some sort of lengthy process, lengthy meaning more than an hour, we do like them. If the food industry can come up with ways to shorten that down, that's, number one, financially a benefit for them. Number two, they don't have to have anybody watching this ferment or whatever it might be and making sure it's going along properly. And they can make money because it emulates, but it doesn't nourish. You're getting a taste in your mouth that your mouth responds to, and your brain registers, and that part gets satisfied. But in terms of your body having that response that you had, that doesn't happen. And oftentimes we just keep going after that food and wanting it again and again because we're still seeking something that doesn't quite happen. And that's a very interesting phenomenon, but it's very real.
Yeah, you use the term excitotoxins.
Yes.
And I think you were quoting from another author on that. But as a whole,
have you read that
that's
book?
a whole pattern of
Yes.
things that are occurring in our food right now.
Yeah. So excitotoxins, just to be very brief, are MSG is the most commonly understood one for most people. MSG stimulates the tongue and the brain to go, ooh, I want more. It's a very strong stimulation. And we will usually unconsciously try to eat more of that. But what's going on for the body is that it's not getting what it thinks it's getting. It's not getting nourished. It's getting stimulated. White sugar is similar. You know, we get very stimulated from white sugar. Most of us can see that if we just put some on our tongue. Same thing we've done this experiment in class. If you take regular table salt and you take a high mineral content sea salt that hasn't been highly refined, and you taste the two of them, you get quite a stimulus from the table salt, the sodium chloride. But from the other one, it tastes sweet comparatively. And it's a different kind of stimulus. It's this kind of stimulus that makes you want to eat something with it. And this table salt is you can tell, it's a really harsh stimulus. And most all of the experiments that have been done about salt in the body have been done using sodium chloride table salt. There haven't been a lot of experiments done with high trace mineral type sea salts that have such a different impact on the body. There have been some studies done on it now because they're beginning to recognize that it makes a big difference, but not enough to counteract all of the literature that's gone out that says that salt is bad for you, especially as you age. It creates high blood pressure and things like that. And if you have high blood pressure, watch out for your salt. Well, there have been a few studies done where using a high trace mineral salt has helped people to lower their blood pressure. So the dis and misinformation that's out there, probably not on purpose. I prefer to think that it's not purposeful, but it's because somebody's in the industry can benefit from promoting foods that do not nourish us. They stimulate us, but they don't nourish us. And when we get nourished, we function better.
Sure.
We all know that from emotional experiences as well. When we're emotionally nourished, we function so much better than when we're depleted emotionally. And unfortunately, most modern food sources actually deplete us. They don't nourish us. And again, that's the difference between nutritional analysis to me, because the panel on the side of the modern food might look like it has what you need. And if you sat down and just combined a bunch of them together and said, okay, now I'm getting everything I need in the category of iron. Now I'm getting everything that I need in the category of calcium. If I just eat these foods, it'll be great. But it's not nourishing you.
And even if we talked about ingredients, even if we talked about grains and vegetables, and when I look at the food that you're preparing, the ingredients aren't different than the food that you find elsewhere, but it's these distinctions like you're mentioning. There was a fermentation process that was used here that took months instead of hours.
Yes.
Or the
high trace mineral sea salt versus
or the soil quality and the environment where these vegetables were grown in. These things are not always labeled. They could be hard to label, like all of the qualities and all of the factors about how food is grown and where it's grown. And this goes back to what we were saying earlier about actually knowing the person who grows the food and observing yourself the conditions in which it is grown. There's a level of accountability. There's a level of visibility to that.
Transparency, sometimes called, which you certainly can't find if you're eating a lot of industrial type foods.
How do we grow that so that more people have access to that?
By doing what you're doing.
Okay. So
Make it more
awareness is
readily
the key.
available. Mhm.
Yeah.
Awareness is key. And we don't have, humans don't have to stop doing everything that they're doing and go back to some previous age. That's not necessary. Bringing awareness into what you're doing at whatever level you start makes a difference. Even in a big city where you can't trace back everything that you're going to eat, if you can trace back a few things and you find yourself being nourished from that, notice that and go after that. Seek that out. There are restaurants that care. They're putting a lot of attention into what they're doing and where they're sourcing from. Start frequenting those restaurants. Help make the people who are operating from that kind of an awareness be sustained so that they can continue doing what they're doing. And all of the people that they're sourcing from get nurtured and nourished by you buying from that restaurant. We have a chicken grower here in the valley who just recently got a contract with one of the better restaurants locally. And that's awesome. That's really awesome because his chickens are the best I've ever had. And why not have a local restaurant that has a good reputation be buying from him? It's more expensive, but not by a lot. And the product, in the end, when it's finished going through these people's hands that cook it, who care, and these people at this restaurant do care. They own a winery, they own a vineyard, they own a farm, and they use their own products from their farm, and they buy from local growers. Why not change that whole restaurant industry over to more people saying, are you buying from local farmers? Would you consider doing that? And those things can happen, and they do happen. When people start asking those questions, change starts. And that's, if you go out to eat a couple of times a month, or if you go out to eat a couple of times a week, you can have an impact, a huge impact, and get some friends to start paying attention to those things. And no matter where you live, you can make a difference. And no matter what country you live in. It's a little bit more, I think it happens more in Europe than it does, for sure, than it does here, that the farm-to-table kind of orientation is really supported by the people. In our country, we're just beginning to understand what a valuable thing to do. Why not start helping the farmers that grow at a level of caring and are not just trying to rake in big bucks? And again, I'm not saying all people who are growing large industrial farms are trying to manipulate the system so that they can make a lot of money. But more awareness that style doesn't enhance all these other relationships, which make a difference and which ultimately nourish us.
Yeah.
I know that we're going out and in and out and in, but all of these things really matter to me. One of the things that we paid attention to in class that I know you were intrigued with was food combinations. Learning to understand how foods can be combined in a meal so that your digestion can work at its highest levels. And, not getting too extreme about that sort of thing, but starting to develop awareness. Wow, I notice when I eat my dessert right after I finished my meal, I actually don't feel as good as I felt before I ate the dessert.
Right.
Little things like that. Just getting enough awareness that you can begin to shift how you're in relationship with food so it works for you better.
And learning how your own digestion system
Processes
works so that you can work with it. You can feed it foods that it's going to more easily be able to process.
Yeah.
Or you can diagnose like what's going on with your digestion and what you need in that moment. And it might not be the excitotoxin, the
Right.
thing that's most exciting and a temptation for you, but it might be something that's less exciting, but more nourishing.
Dang, do you feel better?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah. All of those things. How come we don't just learn that in our families? We could start promoting paying more attention that way and having children grow up with more of that attention being paid to their food and their food sources so that it's more real to them. I remember being on some of our farms in our little valley where, second graders would come on the farm, and they had no idea that a carrot got pulled out of the ground, because when the farmer asked them, where do you think a carrot came from? They all would answer, the grocery store. That's where the carrot came from. And when the first time they pulled the carrot out of the ground and they saw the carrot and they tasted the carrot, it was mind-blowing to them. You could see them go, wow. And it actually tasted sweet and delicious.
Right, right.
So all those things could happen at a much younger age if we were paying more attention to the bigger picture.
Yeah. Yeah. And how does that transform that whole generation's relationship to food? I think for me, even the little forays that I've done into growing my own food or fermenting give me such a closer relationship, because I can actually appreciate the processes that are taking place.
Yeah. And you probably, if you didn't have any ferments that you made yourself, when you went to a grocery store or a health food store to look for some, you probably pay a lot more attention in a different way to what was being said on the label, I would imagine. Most of the times that's what happens to me when I go to another country, or I can't find the things that I'm used to, but I'm also looking at what's available, or I go to a farmer's market in Mexico and I'm looking at what's available, and I have enough knowledge and information that I can translate what they're telling me into, that's going to work for me. I think I'll buy that.
Right. I know the process that was used to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is really nice.
Yeah.
Not having to get sick when you go to another culture and come home.
Right.
is really nice.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you had an experience where certain foods have saved the day for you when you're traveling?
Well, ferments are the big one. When I manage to take ferments with me when I travel, I think I told this in class at least once. I went into a restaurant, I had a meal, it tasted fine. I was mostly engaged in the conversation, and I left the restaurant and I started to feel really sick. And I said, oh my gosh, I think I might have gotten food poisoning. I went back and got some ferments and I downed them very quickly. I took some of the juice as well as chewed on some. And I went from, oh boy, I'm going to be vomiting and having diarrhea for a while because this has really got me. It cleared up right away. So now every time I can travel with ferments, I do. I bring them with me, or where I'm going, I ask if they have any available that I can utilize so I don't have to carry them with me. I've also cooked for people who came from other countries to teach classes here, lamas from Tibet. And they were elderly people, they were usually in their 80s, and they always brought their cooks with them. And their cooks always brought familiar foods from the country of origin, because they knew that if they just ate the food that was available to them, they might not be able to keep their clarity of thought. They had some experiences. I asked all these questions.
Interesting.
They had some experiences the first few times they came. They didn't bring their cooks or their food because the Americans that they were coming to assured them that they had
We've got good food
foods.
here. Yeah.
And it didn't work. They had, they got home and they were sick.
Yeah.
And they managed to power through the time that they were here for their teachings. But after that, they started bringing their cooks and foods with them, which is a big deal. Transporting food through customs is not easy. And then when I cooked for some that came here to our valley, and I also cooked for some that went outside of Denver into a remote location, and at the end of the event, they called me up to the front. The Lama called me up to the front, and he thanked me. And he 3 days before we were done, he had told his cook that he could take a break and not have to cook special for the Lama because he could eat the food and it wasn't having an adverse effect on him.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things affirm for me, okay, now these are people that have spent their whole lives in one place usually, eating the food, taking care of themselves in the way that they do, and then travel because they're wanted for their wisdom to another country and realize that they need to bring some of what's with them. There's also a story about the Olympics, which I think you've heard back in I think it was the 1990 Olympics, the Korean, I could be wrong about the dates, the Korean team realized that they hadn't brought their kimchi with them, and they refused to go out and perform until they sent a jet back to Korea to get the kimchi to bring it back, because they considered it, that's what takes care of us. So when cultures that have those things in place come to our culture and affirm that something good is happening, it really tells me that we're on the right track about something. Because these people know in a way that we don't tend to know as much about here. We're too many years separated from that kind of knowledge and wisdom, and it's like learning to grow up in a cultural resource that's very stable, that hasn't been hugely influenced by modern practices.
Well, and those are people who are also practicing awareness. They're practicing body awareness. So, I mean, that's another reason essentially why they're so sensitive to a change in what they eat.
Yes, and that it's not just that their tummy feels a little bit, that sooner or later it's going to affect their capacity to think, to be responsive, etc. They have that awareness much quicker than most of us tend to do.
Yeah, I've noticed what you mentioned as well, of like my stomach starts to feel sick from something, and if I eat sauerkraut or drink the juices, I can correct that, which to me means that there's a bacterial imbalance or a microbiome imbalance that's happening there. That's why my stomach feels bad, and then bringing that balance out of the good bacteria essentially allows them to outcompete whatever's happening there and come back.
Yeah. And for the most part in our country, there's no awareness about that. It's been lost. And, as fermentation is becoming a little bit more popular, it's being regained, thank goodness. But to lose things like that and not be aware that we have so much more control over our well-being just through our food, never mind all the other practices that we could be doing that would take care of us. We do food 2 to 3 times a day, some people 4. For me, it's like, let's bring some awareness to that area. And let's also bring awareness from that area out into the greater practices of our culture, of our social systems, etc., and maybe be a little bit more kind. Most of these things take some time to do, and when you take time about anything, you usually tend to slow down a little bit internally, and it's easier to be kind. I find there's a direct link. Our well-being, when it's in place and it's stable, it's a lot easier to be kind and to be considerate and to have more capacity for embracing something that normally is different from you. It influences the part of us that I would say could influence peaceful relations between people, to be healthy and well at a deep core level.
Have you felt the accelerations that have occurred in our culture? And what's your relationship to that?
Oh, that's such a big subject. Some people call it the disintegration of what's happening in our culture, but also on the planet. I think that because we've so often thrown out the baby with the bathwater when we improve something and don't consider the larger impacts of those improvements, we have lost something, and it's irreplaceable. You can't just gloss it over. I don't even know if I want to get into that subject because it could be so big. But I do notice that...
Like the shortcuts we're taking have consequences.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, just our little culture here in the greater North Fork Delta County Valley, some of the things that have occurred recently that you paid attention to, where people were not considering enough from a perspective both grounded in this valley, but also the larger perspectives. And it caused people to get riled and say, no, this is not okay. That doesn't always happen. The people don't always rise up and say something's wrong with what's happening and we need to course correct. I think part of why it can happen in this valley is because more people are still connected to the source of their life well-being, outdoors a lot. We live in a really pristine climate in many ways. A lot of them are growing their own food or growing and eating the food from someone else that's growing the food. There's a higher concentration of that here. I think it creates a different kind of awareness among the members of our community. I don't just think it, I can observe it.
Yeah.
It's really easy to see. Many people who visit our valley go, wow, you were one of them when you first came. There's something here. I don't quite know what to call it, but there's definitely something here about the way people interact with one another. And it's been here for a really long time. Back in the 60s when the hippie movement came out to this valley, the farmers, they were mostly farmers and miners here. And the farmers didn't understand the hippies. It was like, whoa, what is this? Was what happened for them. But they also didn't reject them. And slowly but surely, the hippies got to know the farmers, and the farmers got to know the hippies, and they helped each other. That didn't happen everywhere where the hippies went.
Right.
They had, anyway, that's a whole other thing. But I believe it's because there's been such a grounded way that people have lived in this valley for so long, still associated with simple practices, having gardens, having farms, having ranches. Even the miners, liked to buy from the farms, the orchards that are here. All of that was enough left intact to keep people having more space for one another. They could embrace one another's differences. And I know it's true because there's so many people from my generation that got involved in food like me that I know over the long period of time that I've been doing it. And their capacity for embracing and actually appreciating other cultures and other peoples is really high. It's noticeably high because they're not threatened by it. Mm-hmm. There's so much to learn. And that's seen, with examples of people in the Peace Corps when they went to other countries. And the ones who wanted to go to other countries to change them and get them, fixed so that they could be more like us had a very different experience than the ones that went and wanted to bring something, but also were open and embracing of, wow, I learned a lot while I was there. Mm-hmm. And I developed an appreciation for the practices that they have, even though they seem downtrodden and poor compared to us. Many people were really changed by that, and it's always very interesting to me to watch and see if there are patterns involved. Mm-hmm. Why are some people more open and more embracive, and why are some people not? And sometimes I can see some direct relationships based on how they eat and how their family of origin ate. Hmm. And that gets into some really controversial stuff. But
one of the things I noticed when I was filming there was a land use code. It was back in
a large public event.
Yeah, it was a public hearing back in February.
Yep.
And I remember just feeling so proud, hearing so many people come up to the podium and talk about their connection with the land, mm-hmm. and how important that was to them, how integral that was to their way of life. And I just felt really proud to be here and to be surrounded by people like that.
Yeah, and that they were willing to go on public record and articulated really well. I felt the same way. I had tears in my eyes a few times. To hear people take a stand for these types of things and their significance and importance against something which is going to turn everything into a cut and dried mechanical series of regulations that take nothing into account about the humans and the impact on how they've been living their lives and why they've been able to do reasonably well utilizing their own integrity rather than the need for some sort of enforcing series of regulations that don't make sense in the first place in some ways.
Yeah, I, I think it's that the policies and the decisions of the authorities might not really have any awareness of these traditional practices. Mm-hmm. They're not mainstream in our culture anymore. So why would there be, any valuing of the benefits of that, right? Yeah. And it's easy to trample over and create conditions that make that way of life difficult to pursue if you're not careful, if you're not aware of it enough to safeguard and protect it.
Yeah. And what I grew up in a city.
Really, it doesn't need protection. It needs non-interference.
Yeah, from our point of view. But that mindset that believes that we need to put practices in place that will protect the vast majority of people without seeing where there's an innate protection that occurs when a farmer is taking care of his land and his water's coming from somewhere else and somebody's using that water in a particular way before him. They go and talk to the person and they see if they can resolve it. That wanting some higher authority to resolve those kinds of issues is very different. That's like I'm going to ask you to be responsible for my well-being. And when I'm mutually interested in your well-being and my well-being, it's a whole different dynamic. It's a very different mindset. It's a very different environment that we create when we communicate with one another. And unfortunately, that has been lost a lot. But when you're a farmer and, growing food for yourself, your family, and your community, you're integrally involved in many, many aspects of your community, as are you as a consumer if you consume primarily from your local farmers. You're going to be more is at stake for you if you want to continue to keep having that available to you when something comes up that might adversely affect the farmers that you're dealing with. So those are very natural things that it can occur between human beings that get lost when everything gets too mechanized, when everything gets too sterilized, when we stop remembering that people actually have an innate capacity to regulate themselves, and they get better at doing that the closer they are to simple processes, like growing their own food or helping a farmer by buying the food from the farmer and appreciating that they have that farmer to buy it from. All of that's...
And in many cases, I think people have just never experienced some of these processes, some of these methods for preparing food because they take longer. They haven't been commercialized. Yes. And now we've had generations of human beings growing up eating the food that's been able to be commercialized. And for me, the proof was in the pudding in the sense of just trying it, just getting to experience that and going like, there's something different here.
Yeah.
And I want to know what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it takes that experience to realize that something else is possible.
It does. And in my case, where I've been making food for other people for a really long time, I'm really aware that it actually takes an experience. I don't want to go through their head first. I want to go through them having an experience first, because that leaves a dent. It makes a difference. Most people, when they come to an event that I'm doing, they leave saying, "What happened? Why do I feel this way?" And they come back and they ask about it. And if more of that could happen for more people, we'd start turning a lot of things around. And I believe more of that is happening. Farmers are getting more of a voice, for example. They're starting to be paid attention to. It's slow, but they're not going to give up. Most of the farmers I know are going to keep farming. And so in order to keep farming and not be overrun by people who just want to develop land, quote unquote, develop the land, they're going to have to stand up, and they do stand up. And people like me, I do stand up and I say, this is important. It's very hard to make a living in the classic sense of things, the way it's become classic sense of things, because it's underappreciated. All of these types of things are underappreciated. But more and more people are coming to appreciate it.
Do you see a pathway forward that makes these things viable, whether it's preparing food that's nutritious, whether it's raising food that's nutritious?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do, because people are having experiences. We have people that come to this valley, for example, from all over, and they have an experience here. They have food experiences here, they have relationship experiences here, and they go home, and then they keep communicating to the people that they met here. That happens to me all the time. People keep calling me up from California and places that have come, and I want to know more. How do you do that? Can you talk to me about it? Can we do more? And when that starts happening, that networking thing, where people are networking because something moved them, something changed something for them, and they just said, I need to know more about this.
What could we do better to help people have that experience of nourishing food, whether and locally, like from a local supplier, whether that's people who live here or people who are traveling here? How can we help them have that experience more?
Well, spread the news, spread the information. Always just keep improving about how we do that. What could we do better? I think it's more, how can we do more?
I mean, I notice a lot of the restaurants here aren't actually serving local food.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which is kind of a shame, because we have some really awesome stuff available here locally.
Yeah, and just so you know, more of them are serving local food than ever before. Mm. The trend is towards more here in this valley. But that's because people have stuck it out. People have continued to keep saying what they're saying and doing what they're doing, and not giving up. So even if you're hearing this particular conversation and you're saying, what can I do, wherever you are, don't give up. Pay attention to that little spark of something that's been touched in you, and start asking questions and reaching out and making some changes at whatever level you make them. Because the changes that you make, I mean, you had your experience when you came here and you started making some changes, and it kept influencing you to look deeper and to do more and to be more motivated and to do something like this. That's what happens if you just keep honoring that part of you that's been stirred up about something from listening. Do something about it, whatever it is in your place, in your area, and go meet some farmers, Go to some farmers markets, and then ask the farmer if you can come to their farm. Just make it a fun thing to do. Bring your kids or bring your nephews and nieces, and do those things. Reconnect with the place where you get your food from.
Yeah, there are many farms that are starting to have, whether it's a glamping experience or a storefront right there on the farm.
Yep.
There are many farms that are welcoming visitors and wanting them to experience that. So that's definitely something that people can find all over the country.
Yep. And if you don't know about CSAs, which is community supported agriculture, they're all over. The farms that are community supported agriculture farms exist everywhere in this country now. So look up community supported agriculture, go to an event at a farm that it has a CSA, which means that you pay a price and they provide you with a box of food in season. And it varies widely from one community to another, one farm to another, but that's a way to make a connection, and instead of going to the grocery store, you get your eggs, you get your milk or whatever you're going to be getting, and your strawberries, and you start to also become more aware of seasonal foods in a way that you probably never could do if you just were always going to the grocery store and getting whatever you wanted, the strawberries in whatever season, because they were being brought in from somewhere else.
Yeah, one of the other things that CSAs do that isn't immediately obvious to people who aren't in agriculture, agriculture is very seasonal in terms of the money that you're going to make out of it, and you have to invest all that time and energy up front, and there's risk. You could lose a crop. So a CSA is a way to invest up front in the farmer's harvest and to share in a portion of that in a way that actually mitigates their risk, helps some of their cash flow issues. It's really a win-win way to work with your local producers.
Big time.
Yeah.
Yeah, CSAs are a great resource, and the more people can find out about them, the better off we all are.
Mm.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with people? Just a message of encouragement to get started in forming a relationship with their food?
Yeah. Pay attention to where your food is sourced from to the degree that you're able to. Ask questions so that you can learn that. If you go to a health food store or a farmer's market, ask questions. Get to know the people that you're getting that food from. If you have restaurants in your town or your city that are utilizing local produce, frequent them. Give them your business. You can make a difference. Same thing if you want to utilize other agricultural products, meats, dairy, all kinds of things. Find out and taste it. Let it impact you, because it will make a difference. You will notice a difference when something comes directly off the farm and you have a relationship with the farmer. I also, of course, maybe not of course to all people, but I promote organic agriculture. And it's okay with me if it's not certified organic, because some farms are so small that the certification process is cost prohibitive. But like your lamb example, you met the farmer, you readily see what his practices are, and you can ask questions, and you can get educated too. This is a whole world of interesting people that are committed to what they're doing and do a lot of research to be able to do it well. And it just gives you a new aspect of your life that you can know more about. And if you have friends that like to cook, turn them on to, how about getting some local produce together, and let's maybe do once a month. I've done all kinds of things at my home, where we would get together to have a social opportunity, but eat foods that were prepared from all local places.
So like do a potluck, do a cookout, learn some new recipes, work with whatever the local produce is.
Yep. Just bring whatever you're taking away from this particular experience and bring it into some sort of practice with someone in some way. And then let that influence you. Learn about ferments. Try some out. Go to your local health food store and find the ferments that are in the refrigerator section. That means they're still alive. And try a few out. See if you like one. Let it influence you. Have an experience. I think having experiences is crucial. Go to a farm. If you join a CSA, ask them when you can come and help them. Most of them provide opportunities for their members to come and work on the farm. If you've never weeded with a farmer or harvested with a farmer, it's a great experience. And you can just do it once. It'll affect you. It'll make a difference.
Yeah, you're going to learn a lot, and you'll get at least as much exercise as going to the gym.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a lifestyle. Anything to do with food production is a lifestyle that definitely uses many parts of your being and your body. Yeah.
So where can people find out more about your classes that you offer?
Okay, so my phone number is 970-417-2299. I prefer texts because I'm oftentimes not with my phone and I can respond to texts more readily than voicemail. So I'll just leave it at that. I don't spend a lot of time figuring out how to promote what I do, as you well know. And if you're in Paonia or you want to find out more about me, you can go through the Learning Council. I work under their umbrella. And their calendar usually has my events on it. Not always, but usually my events are on it. And the Learning Council is an important nonprofit in our town that promotes the relationship between all of us and our agricultural roots, along with a lot of other things that they do, social justice issues. So they're a great resource, and they do have information up online. I have a website that I'm just developing, so soon I'll have that available too.
Yeah, and you do in-person events where you teach people to cook, allow them to have food experiences themselves, and I don't think you've done anything in terms of online education, right?
No, but I keep getting pressured to do that.
Yeah,
So
well, it's interesting to I hear the value in having that direct experience. So it's like you can get some of that online, but at some point you need to just go try the food.
Right. Yeah, or find someone near you that sometimes there are other people like me in your someone's community who just have a passion for food and for local food and all those connections, and they're doing whatever it is that they're doing, and maybe you can find them by asking at a farmer's market, do you have anyone that's a teacher that instructs about using the foods that you're growing? You ask your farmers. Because there are people like me out there. I'm not the only one. So, yeah.
Well, thank you, Chrys, so much for doing what you're doing, and for just sharing that knowledge and that wisdom. And I know you've impacted so many people's lives here in more than 50 years that you've been cooking for this area, right?
Well, over 30 for this
Over
area,
30,
but 50 years that I've been doing what I've been doing,
Yeah, just amazing. So thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you for doing what you're doing. Yeah, it makes a difference to have someone who's willing to do these kinds of interviews and try to get information like this out there. I appreciate it.
I'm really excited for the conversations that are coming, and just really have great love for the people that I've met here, and we've got so many awesome people.
Yeah.
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 Thank you.
Great. You're welcome.